Dave, what does being a session player mean to you?
Man, being a session player, it allows me to, it means a lot to me. It means that I get to be involved in a really creative way with a whole bunch of people's music. I get to be social and get to be around people and be creative in a team environment.
That's a great way of thinking about it. The whole collaboration of it.
Yeah,
being able to be creative within or being put boundaries around it with a team of people, so you're not like on your own island by yourself.
Totally, yeah. There's built-in collaboration. I feel like I do less well when it's just sort of me staring at a computer screen by myself. I always enjoyed playing in bands and that kind of thing. So being in that environment, I think I thrive the best.
Was there a point early on as a kid or when you started to fall in love with music and playing an instrument that you recognized that you could make a living with your instrument?
The idea of making a living with my instrument kind of came closer to the end of high school. There was a cover band where I grew up in Calgary, and they were an example of a bunch of guys that just they had bar gigs, and then they had some corporate gigs, and they had these things, and I was like, holy crap, this is amazing. Like, you can play the piano for a living. A mentor of mine, name was Mike Little, from Calgary, was somebody who was doing that, and I was like, wow, okay, that can be done.
So when you're getting out of high school and you have that experience, what sort of light bulb did that put off into you to what your next step would be? Did you went to school for music and then?
Yeah, I went to music school for a little bit. In Toronto, and I was there for a couple of years, and it was great forced practice for me. I wasn't great with school stuff in high school, so the option of being able to like play piano to get into college basically was cooler than having to rely on like math grades and stuff like that.
And then in that process of being in college, what sort of things did you take to that you felt like are beneficial into your long-term, career, and what things maybe weren't as important?
It was a jazz performance degree, so it was very sort of playing oriented with a very narrow scope kind of thing of what you were learning. But as with a whole bunch of things, in retrospect, I was just sort of building my tool belt of skills. So during that time, as I said, like music school was like forced practice, and I'm kind of lazy and kind of in many ways, I'm not the guy to sit down and practice scales and practice this and play in different keys. And so it was, there was a bit of that, like, okay, well, you're being tested on these scales and these keys in 1 month from now. So like, you got to do it. And so transposing, I can play in every key. I can play in different styles. I can play jazzy enough to to fool non-jazz musicians. And not that I wanted to make a career in jazz, but learning it and studying it and getting really deep into it and listening to a lot of it, and then all the offshoots of it, and getting inside of all the fusion music, and just having the time to spend a couple of years just really musically indulgent in really what playing the instrument is, and getting that. There's no way to replace that. And so there's times in being a session player now that I'm those skills, not though I don't use them every single day, when it's time to make a Christmas record and you're in a high pressure situation and you're having to play a piano and you can't transpose it, and it's weird chord changes and weird keys, and you just have to be able to do that. And it's in those times that I'm grateful that I spent a couple of years playing fusion music in G flat. Mm-hmm. And so whatever, doesn't faze me now. because I did the work back then, basically.
Would you say that there's a bit of discipline that is gained from the like collegiate experience too, where you said like, one of the things that you got out of it was forced practice. So like, would you take away from college that process of understanding like why it's important to manage your time in that way where you're intentional about what you're using that time with?
Think at some point you have to put the time in. If you're somebody that's really self-directed and you can achieve the high proficiency on your instrument, just the actual baseline playing, like there's so many other parts of being a session player that aren't playing, but you have to be good at playing, or you have to have a base level of musicianship. And so however you get there, there's no wrong way to get there. For me, it worked out that it was jazz school, but some people get a gig right away and go on the road, or some people they find people to play music with, and then they spend a lot of time playing with those people, and you learn things. Like, you will learn eventually. That was just, for me, a good way, because I'm particularly not disciplined in the self-directed kind of thing.
That's a really great way of, or perspective of looking at it, is sort of understanding the importance of understanding who each of us are as individuals, and then trying to discover what's the best path that's going to help me get to my end result based on how I learn, how I grow.
For sure.
And what environment is going to support that.
For me also, I was laying the foundations of like your personal group of friends, basically. There was a lot of people at music school that sort of didn't stray outside of that social circle. And I always, even then, sort of had my eye on the prize that while school is important and all that stuff, like, more important is meeting people and I'll say the word networking because there's a good word for it, but a lot of people like spend too much time focusing on said networking. It's really just making friends. And so during college, I just hung out at like cooler bars in downtown Toronto as opposed to the dorms, basically. And like, I had a apartment downtown as opposed to like living on campus, and just sort of always tried to be diverse with sort of
people
that
you
side
surround
of it.
yourself with.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So in getting towards the end of your college, when was there a point while you're in school that you started to set some of those goals for yourself? Like, this is what I'm going to do for a living, once you started to recognize that potential?
Yeah, it was like partway through the second year, which is about the time when I sort of dropped out, when MySpace was a thing, and I had sent a whole bunch of MySpace messages to a whole bunch of people, and the artists that I thought were cool. The whole thought of being a sideman, to me, I said, that's what I want to do. I dabbled in bands and like touring in a band, and All for One and One for All, and we're going to get a record deal, and we're going to be huge, and it'll be awesome. Like, there's a path for that, and not to discourage anybody from doing that, but like, at the time, my heart was waning. I had to leave the band because I thought I wanted to be a session player. Turns out that I had been sending messages to all these sort of Canadian country acts that were all managed by the same management company, and so the like digital person that dealt with those things, basically I was sending all of these same messages to the one person.
That's awesome.
Who turned out to be a longtime friend of mine, and we ended up working together for a long time. But yeah, she forwarded on to one of the artists, a guy named Johnny Reed, sort of got the gig from MySpace.
That's awesome. So that's like sophomore year of college, and then you dropped out and went on the road with him?
Basically, yeah. Yeah, I had the opportunity to go on the road, and I kind of was weighing do I want okay, if I stay in music school, then I'll get this degree, which is, at the time, that was the goal, was to get a music degree. But then I was going, okay, well, with the music degree, what does being a musician with the degree versus being a musician without a degree, and what does that mean for me? And I mean, it was clear to me at the time that you needed a degree to teach. In my head, it was like, I don't need the piece of paper.
Right.
And so that was that.
Yeah, I think that's something that a lot of us recognize, and some after they get the piece of paper, and some before.
Right.
But I found a lot in just meeting a lot of different players over the years that a fair amount of the ones that are at the level that you're at in your career did not complete school because they recognize that.
Yeah.
And not to discourage people necessarily from completing college or anything, but there's something to be said, I think, for understanding the reality of it, where like was kids were told that we need to get a degree in order to be a successful human being,
Right.
But there is a path that is separate from that, dependent upon what your goal is, whether you have the talent for it, and whether you have the personality and work ethic and determination to be able to make that a reality, to realistically be able to make that a reality.
Right.
Some people might need longer in school to be able to develop that than others. Some people are able to recognize it, like yourself, and follow that path sooner on.
If as far as your sort of career planning has gone, is the end result is school. And if you haven't planned further than, well, I'm going to get a degree and then I'm going to work in the field, like that is not a full thought out career plan, So if you think, if you kind of zoom out beyond music school and see schooling as just a way to put tools in your tool belt for your ultimate career of whatever that looks like, then you're able to recognize when it's time to move on from that, and take the opportunity. In my head, I wasn't going to get gigs weren't falling out of the sky. So a chance to get on a tour bus and to, do that seemed, I was like, well, of course I can always come back to school, but this is something that I should pursue.
Yeah.
It seemed obvious to me at the time.
Yeah. And trusting your gut is important. And it was clear that you knew that was what you wanted to do. No one sits there and sends out random MySpace messages, without doing that. And that is such an important example of just taking action. Mm-hmm. People want this sort of thing. And in a lot of career paths where we get taught, like, early on, that you go to school, you get a degree, you learn a trade, then you find an entry-level position, and then you work your way up. And a lot of it is waiting for other people to give you an opportunity. Mm-hmm. And what I've found, and I think we'll all find in this industry, is that there's no one that's going to walk up to you and hand you an opportunity. You really have to go out there and get it for yourself.
Totally.
So when that first opportunity happened, you went on the road with Johnny, and then what's sort of the next path in your evolution?
I career? Did that for a couple of years, a whole bunch of years, actually. And I realized, so I was playing with him. I got a gig with a singer named Amanda Marshall, who's like a Canadian pop singer. She had a lot of success in Europe and sort of the other countries other than the States, but she's really big in Canada. At the time, I had kind of two of the larger touring gigs as a keyboard player in Canada. I was 19-ish at the time, 20. I was still teaching piano, and I was still like playing bar gigs and weddings and bar mitzvahs and stuff, which again was cool, but the goal was to be on the road and do that kind of thing. And so if you're not playing with one of the, international touring artists in Canada, like a Bieber or Michael Bublé or Bryan Adams or Celine Dion or one of those people that tours outside of Canada, almost the bigger you get as an artist, the less gigs there are to play, because you stop playing all the little places in between. Like a cross Canada tour is 40 shows, 50 shows, and so you just kind of, there's a ceiling, basically. And so I was like, okay, well, I need to figure out what's next. And that was sort of a theme for me, was like seeing where I'm at and going like, okay, what's next? And not, it was like, okay, well, how do we move to the States? And so I sort of reverse engineered that little dream of like moving to the States and being a session player. And New York, Nashville, LA were the three places I was looking at, and I wasn't. New York seemed really difficult and a lot of overhead, and it seemed, LA was a lot further away. I was in Toronto at the time. Like Nashville was really close. I knew some people that were down there through MySpace. I had a couple funny side note. One of the people on MySpace that I met, I had put in my phone and my contacts, and their name still is this in my contact, and it says Jake Owen, singer ? Phone. This is before Jake Owen, but we were MySpace friends, and I sent a whole bunch of messages to people in Nashville going like, hey, I'm a keyboard player in Canada, thinking about moving down there, like love to just shoot the shit. And so he was somebody that was like, yeah, just call me when you get down here. And later, like years later, ended up working with him and like showing him like, is this your phone number and your email address? He's like, yeah, like from like 15 years ago. So that was funny.
So was there something that you discovered that brought you here, or did you just make the move and figure it out once you got here?
It was a little bit of both. The guy that I was playing with, Johnny Reed, lives down here. He would fly me in for all of our gigs, basically. So I could move down here with a gig, which just made it all possible. Being Canadian, I can't like get a job at waiting tables or like doing non-musical stuff because of like work visa things. So it was really huge that he was cool enough to like let that happen. And
so you're here and you knew that like that was the gig, but the idea was to be able to grow into bigger situations and expand, your network. So what are some of the steps that you took to do that once you got here?
Yeah, as soon as I got here, I started just going out. In my head, it was my job to have something to do every night. I found out kind of where the players were playing, and just started going and hanging out and making friends and shaking hands. And on playing on Lower Broadway, people would let me, eventually they'd let you sit in and play a couple songs with the band, give the keyboard player a bathroom break. Eventually people asked me for my number and that kind of thing. And
so at first, were those sort of meetings that you had at the places that you were going out for live shows, did those calls end up being like live gigs for the most part? And then
those were like within the like Lower Broadway thing, playing on Legends Corner, playing at the stage, or playing at Tootsie's or whatever. And a lot of the people in the bands on, like, for example, Tuesday night, the band that played there were all like road musicians for various people. A lot of people from Toby Keith's band and some people from Rascal Flatts touring band. And that was the place I found out where like all the touring guys would go and have beers on Tuesday night because they are not on the road. Eventually, through that and through knowing people there, I got my first audition for like a road gig down here, which was an audition for Joe Nichols. So after a year or two of sort of doing Lower Broadway and playing wedding bands and still doing that stuff here, eventually got a road gig.
So when you got that gig, did that then lead you to just focus on that gig, or were you still doing all those things and then
No, that allowed me to like consolidate upwards. There were enough gigs basically to to not have to do the other things.
Gotcha. In Canada, that answered your question of what's next.
Yeah, that doesn't exactly. It was like in Canada, it doesn't exist to play 120 shows a year or 150 shows. And some people play way more than that. But like Joe, I think at the most we were doing 120, and it doesn't allow you time to do other things, really. which was great, which was exactly what I wanted.
When did you start thinking, okay, what's next? When did that next shift start to occur?
I was able to always sort of check in with my surroundings. It became clear to me that when the road manager might have said something like, you guys are playing Letterman next week, and my response was, fuck, that sucks. Which is not the response that you should be giving it for those sort of things. And in my head, like, okay, we're playing Letterman, so it means we have to fly into LaGuardia, which is a lame airport, and we'll have a 5 a.m. lobby call, and the studio is really cold, and you have to spend all day waiting around.
That's such a great example for having perspective. As musicians and creatives, we try so hard and for so long to find something that will just help us pay our bills. Yeah. And then once you find it, you're like, well, I can't, even if I don't enjoy this anymore, I got to stick with this because this is what's making it happen. And it happens for so many people where you become jaded through that process.
Totally.
So giving that such clear example and that visual, like for me, it's like, wow, that's just such a clear perspective on how to be aware of yourself, be very like self-aware and understand when it's time to make an adjustment, because none of us got into this to be upset about making
exactly
our music, you know?
Like that is not the correct response to that news. A big thing that I learned from Lower Broadway, what I learned from all of those other road guys, what I learned from all of those things is that the playing is kind of like in Nashville, the playing is like a yes or no question. Like, we're not playing rocket surgery music, having come from a jazz background, playing in all the keys, playing Mahavishnu orchestra, fusion music. It's not about that. Not saying it's not important. Like, you have to be able to play. You have to be able to play at an industry standard level. So many people check those boxes. And so what is the actual thing that will set you apart? And that is personality, and people call it like the hang, you know, it's like, it's more about the hang than it is about your chops. But that is the truth is there's 24 hours in a day, and like you're playing 90 minutes a day on the road. So, what are you doing the rest of the time? And like, what sort of energy and vibe are you bringing to a bus? And the answer should be like, you know, thumbs up, good energy, which is not complaining about everything, which is sort of kind of where I caught myself. You know, I needed to figure out how to get off the road. I needed to figure out how to make a living in town. I did what I needed to do while I was on the road. I bought a house because I had a W-2 income. I couldn't get a mortgage without a W-2 income. I couldn't get a green card without that gig. So I got that figured out for me, being a Canadian. Got the green card and like bought a house in East Nashville at the time, which was cheap. Not so much anymore.
Right.
And so I sort of checked those boxes that needed to be checked, and then kind of just jumped in and started calling myself a session player. I picked up some other road gigs that were like less of a time commitment that allowed me to do bits and pieces on the road and then start building momentum in town.
That's a really important point to talk about, the transitional place, you know, because you can't go from the full-time like gig to nothing and then build up a client base as a session player.
Totally.
So, and that's a challenge that a lot of people face is like, I'm on the road, I'm doing this thing, I want to be in the studio, or, you know, vice versa. How do you make that transition? And you explain it in that way really gives a clear perspective of how you need to do it.
Yeah. I think of like a lot of the time in my career is like, there's the cruising lane and then there's the passing lane. And when you're in the cruising lane, you can just kind of wake up, do a good job, stay in your lane, and just be a blessing to be around. But then when it comes time to get in that passing lane and figure out what's next and make moves, then you're working overtime, and then you're staying up late. And that's when you do the things that might burn somebody out if that is how you lived your life indefinitely. The analogy for me that I always use in my head is that of like an airplane. Like it takes all the throttle to get an airplane off the ground, but you're not going to reach your destination if you stay full throttle once you reach cruising altitude. If you don't back off a little bit and sort of take perspective, and you will run out of fuel before you reach your destination. And right. It was about going out and meeting people and going back out to that bar sort of grind a little bit, hanging out at writers' rounds, and like just meeting the people that in the community that sort of makes their living in town. I feel like a lot of people sort of shoot themselves in the foot by making grand statements about, I'm quitting this. I'm no longer a road guy. I never said I am not a road guy or I'm quitting the road. Like the spirit of what I was doing was never that. It was always like an and, not an or thing. Mm-hmm. It's not like road or home. And I think these days that's more important than ever, of the and, not or. Like, be all the things to all the people as much as you can. I was still open to things that paid the bills that would allow me to grow the in-town thing whilst sort of getting off the road. And had I been like Mr. Big Facebook post, I'm quitting the road, I wouldn't have had the opportunities to go on the road with Big and Rich for over a period of a year. And so I had half of a Big and Rich gig, and I had half of a Winona Judd gig for part of a year. And that allowed me to transition, really.
So in that process of transitioning, one of the things that you said is that you started to figure out who are the people that make a living in town, mm-hmm. which I think is an important thing, because you have your eyes set on this. What's next thing? The next thing is being in town, playing on records.
Yeah.
So you switched the circle of people that you were going out to meet.
Yeah.
Where you said earlier, like your job being, my job is to go out at night and find somewhere to go meet someone new,
right,
and make friends and, mm-hmm. and have the hang. You focused on the people and the places that were in town.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that you intentionally tried to discover where do these specific types of people hang out, and then you inserted yourself into those situations to be able to make those connections.
Yeah.
Now, as you're making those connections, what were some of the situations that led to your experiences of being able to get into the studio world?
It's not your fellow musicians, at least for me it wasn't, that were going to help me get into the studio thing. On Lower Broadway, when keyboard player wants to take a piss and get off stage for 5 minutes, they go, Dave, get up here and play. And the risk reward thing is it's an obvious thing. Like, how bad can you be for 3 songs? Uh-huh. But the risk reward thing for getting in the studio, there's a lot more of a risk involved. And a lot of people don't want to take a risk on a new musician. My way into the studio was through songwriters who it was their session. So for example, like if it was a demo session, the songwriter will hire the studio, and a band leader will hire musicians and put the session together. My only way in was if a songwriter was like, hey, I want to book a session, but like I want my friend Dave to play keys. And so this guy Ilya Tashinsky, who he didn't care. He was like, okay, well, it's your session. Like, if he sucks, it's on you. I didn't suck. I wasn't that terrible. I was, 15th on Ilya's keyboard player list. 3 or 4 months after the first session, I got a call from him going like, hey, like, I called every other keyboard player in town. No one's available. Can you do it? And I was like, yeah, of course. Like, course, ready for it, and showed up. And so then maybe I did a good job that day, and then maybe I jumped to 12th on the list. I'm like, okay, well, you did a good job. I'll call him if these other 10 people can't do it. And then maybe 6 months later, I was 6th on the list. And eventually, I was his first call. And so I did a whole bunch of sessions with that one guy that was really busy. And through him, I met the Rolodex sort of grew exponentially. We joke that Ilya is he's our vampire maker, and we'll never my session strength will never be as strong as his because he made us.
That's awesome. But, yeah. So in that process, do you think at that point, did you recognize any specific things that would help you stand out to start to climb that list?
Yeah.
Did you notice things that, I did this and people seem to pay attention to that? And then where did you start to learn what made you special?
Yeah, it was definitely in like a time in country music in 2012, 2013, 2014, where like synthesizers and bleepy bloopy arpeggiators and basically synths were kind of new-ish for having a foreground feature kind of in country music. If I made these wee sounds on the synth in a certain way, like people would go, oh, that's so cool, that's awesome. And so I started building my little bag of synth tricks. It just kind of worked. It was like, okay, well, I have a couple of delay gags, I have a couple of pad things that work, I have a couple of piano sound, and then you getting into sounds and pedals and how you actually go about making them. I don't use a lot of presets, but I do have a lot of like starting points for sounds where if I'm talking about a piano, it's like I've got my 5 or 6 pianos that I like to use, and then here's 5 or 6 different ways I like to affect those pianos. And with those sort of permutations, you can be creative on the spot for the song. And it seems as though you're coming up with a new sound just out of thin air. But it's a sound in a world that you have created before.
So once you started to recognize that those types of sounds were something that would help you stand out in that world, then you went home and you started figuring that process out.
Yeah. And I had,
how did you go through that? Like you just started downloading different virtual instruments, and how did you start to build your library and then start to build your sounds that you could then get to very quickly in a session?
Working with Ilya, I was working 10 to 15 sessions a week. Like we were just doing a ton of sessions back to back. A Nord stage was a great sort of cornerstone for my rig, basically. And it covered the bases for the pianos and whirlies and Rhodes and organs and that stuff. But the synth section was really handy because it, aside from the waveforms that sort of come in it, you can download any sound into the sample section and then affect those things as a synth, basically. So you can download a saxophone sample into there and then turn the decay up and turn verb up and turn the filter down, and you can play it like a pad. You take the attack off of it, and so I figured that like, oh, okay, well, this is cool. Then I can, if I just substitute sound sources in with this workflow and add maybe this pedal, a little bit crush on a timeline, add some delay, add some verb. If I replace that saxophone with an accordion sound, that gives you a really cool, like reedy, it's a different pad. It's sonically completely different, but it's literally the exact same workflow.
a lot of people might think, okay, cool. So I found this sound that works really well for this one thing. Maybe I should save this as a preset. So next time somebody asks for that sound, I can just pull up this same thing. But what you're saying is that you know kind of how you discovered that sound. Yeah. So next time you're going to listen to the song that you're working on in that moment and then create something that might be similar to it, but is going to be specific to what inspires you in that process. And then through that process, you're probably going to discover something else new.
1,000%.
That's cool. So it helps you grow. Do you think that's the route to take rather than just trying to regurgitate the...
That is all I've done and continue to do. And then you can apply that to other, like, you know, that's just sitting with the Nord. If you're in Omnisphere, yes, you can go through all of the presets that Omnisphere has and you can sound like anyone else and that kind of thing. But if you start from scratch and you go to the sound source browser in Omnisphere and scroll through, instead of like the whole presets that have all the effects and all the like layers, and it's all like, it's a whole lot of stuff that you don't need sort of on any given preset sound. But the sound source browser is so deep and so awesome, and they have such cool things that if you sort of follow that, you can mold it and mess with envelopes the same way with all of the things. Filters, put a filter on it. And so then you can start. So I started there, and then it was like, okay, well, you know, we've all heard the piano a million times. What if I put a piano in the sample section, and then I was able to affect a piano, an acoustic sounding piano, the way that I was affecting all of these other pads. And that leads to a whole other world of sounds when you take a sampled piano into into the synth section of anything, really, Omnisphere or a Nord or whatever.
Right. What a great way to figure out how to set yourself apart in a sea of competition.
Sure.
And then trying to figure out, well, let's not just rock with the preset because it sounds cool and I can play it well. Like knowing that you're a great musician, you can figure out a way to come up with a cool part around it. But let's take it a step further by trying to break things down and recreate the sounds to be something that's really unique, you know, to me. And obviously it's done well to help you stand out and, and do your thing. So in that process of trying to discover a sound, and when you got into those first sessions and stuff, did you listen to a lot of stuff on the radio to sort of like get an idea of what was working at the time? Or did you more just kind of trust your gut and follow the instinctual process of being creative and collaborating in the studio environment?
I think being aware of what the current sort of state of music is important, just sort of knowing what's going on. But necessarily listening to that for inspiration for what you're going to do. You know, over the years, the roles of the keyboard player have changed, turns into a more organic chair recently. And, you know, for a period of time, guitar took over a lot of the weird, quirky things, and guitar players had goat keepers and and everybody was on the quest for the perfect eighth note pulse that was synced to the click track. And we've chased that down, you and I, quite a bit, and a worthwhile pursuit. And at the end of the day, like, there is no one great way to do it. They still haven't figured that out. Why is it?
So there's a lot of experimentation. There's also being aware. When you're aware of the things that are popular on radio, do you listen to all genres of music for inspiration? Do you listen to just the genre that you might be focusing on that week on whatever thing that you're playing on?
I think it's an and, not an or thing. And it's like, I think just it is an asset to be aware of all music. And I think it's just also an asset to be aware of all like eras of music, because the way that sound signatures and cliches that come in and out of vogue, it's important to be able to like know what those things are, how they're done. Me growing up, I'm 36 years old. I was born in 85. So Britney and Backstreet Boys and NSYNC and like Max Martin Productions, like those were the synthesizers in my ears in my formative years from 10 to whatever.
Right.
When synths started getting big in country music, I think I stood out because by accident of birth, my like home base for what a synth sound was supposed to sound like sounds like 90s synths. The difference between a good synth sound and a cheesy synth sound, obviously it's very subjective, but it's just where you place a filter or which, it's nuanced. And so I think part of that, being aware of all different eras of music, and just for example, Mellotron now is become really popular again, but knowing the ways that Mellotron has been used in popular music since the 60s or 50s, knowing the Beatles songs and go listen to Tuesday Afternoon by the Moody Blues, and like that is a masterclass in Mellotron. Listening to the first Wallflowers record for the B3 playing, I think that is going to be more informative for a B3 player than anything, really.
That's a great example.
Just for that example, the more cliches that you just have in your pocket to pull from, and sort of knowing when and where to use those musical cliches, that's how you sort of come up with cool things. And I'm not reinventing the wheel. It has to sound fresh but familiar.
You take it out of this other context that it's in, you put it in this context, and then it becomes something new.
Right.
And I think a lot of people discuss the idea around having like a hit instinct or some sort of built-in sort of like tasteful instinct within them versus the idea of like it being something that's kind of like learned over time and stuff. Where do you think that born instinct versus learned instinct applies in the world of becoming a successful session player?
I've seen people be wildly successful by accident. And then I've seen people be wildly successful repeatedly with laser focus, and neither way is right or wrong. And so you can take from that nothing matters and it's all completely arbitrary, and if it's a hit, who knows how or why or whatever. Or you can just be as much a student of the world and just try to just be aware of as much as you can. I mean, at the end of the day, you are trusting your instincts, and the question is whether or not your instincts have been like commercially validated yet or not. And so the thing to, I don't know how it is done, but how it's not done is like fear or a too much brain thing, and like the instinct is more powerful than the analytical brain, because I know producers and songwriters and even session players that go like, man, I don't know what it is, but like I'm gonna do what I think the cool kids are doing, or like I'm gonna try and do a real modern thing, and if you shoot for something as ambiguous as modern for the sake of being modern, and not because it's like real to you and something you want to do, I think that will lead you down the wrong path.
So when you got into this old demo world and you're killing it and that you're climbing the ranks, you're at the top of Ilya's coveted list.
Yes.
And then what were some of the things that helped that generate into records?
Big time producers would be coming in with artists or big artists or big writers. And so for me, it was Brett James and Kip Moore. They brought a demo in and I played a synth part that was cool. I played a sound that they liked, and Brett got my number from Ilya, and that was my first record.
So that next tier of your career happened more through just being in that environment and then allowing the process to take place.
Yeah.
Being patient and doing a good job every day.
Right. It wasn't by me waking up and going like, I'm going to play on more records. It was me waking up going like, I'm just going to kick ass at what's in front of me and be a good person and be a good person to hang out with and bring a good light vibe to the session.
So in that process, as the records started coming up more and more, what was the realization that you started to find on how to continue to make that happen?
There are differences in how to play on those sessions versus demos. In a demo session, typically you're getting 5 or 6 songs in a 3-hour time block. And so your quickness and one takeness and being able to, I just played that B3 pass. I don't have any fixes. Let me stack something on top of that. And being eager to sort of add tracks and that kind of thing. That was what was rewarded and sort of positively reinforced in demo world, because it's just about efficiency. And when you get into records, a lot of those time constraints come off and there's some budgets. And so you can spend a whole session on one song or a whole session on 2 songs. I learned this lesson on this session, on a Kip Moore session. I was sort of playing the record like a demo, and I played a pad, and I think we changed something on the chart 3 or 4 takes in. So they added a bar at the end of the bridge or something like that. And in demo land, I would have just asked the engineer to just, hey, make that edit for me on the pad thing, fly that second chorus to the 3rd section there, and that will work. That's fine. And I'll add something, I'll stack. I said that on the record in a big studio, and it was kind of met with silence on the talkback, and there was, well, Dave, why don't we just play it again? We're not in a rush. You just play that again. And, and it was just like, oh, checked in with the surroundings. Like nobody was rushing. Nobody was, they were taking their time. Like instincts bring you there, and then you can use your analytical brain and refine your instincts. And that's what the time affords you. And there's different ways to use your time. Like you can play down a couple of times and say, hey, I'd love to come into the control room and listen to what's going in and take it before I add something else. Like I'd love to just listen down one time and check in with what the track is and how you guys are, and talk to the producer and talk to the artist. And I didn't know that was like a thing to do until I started doing records and watched people do that. And that is the fun part about doing all of that. It's like having the biggest tool palette, palette and tool belt, tool palette. It's interesting.
Yeah. And you got a huge tool belt that you carry around with a lot of different.
Yeah. And I've just over the years that has grown. A lot of, what we do as session players is kind of translate words into music, or colors into music, or adjectives. 'Cause a lot of people, producers, artists are not, they're not schooled musicians first. And so they know what they want to hear, but they don't know how to tell you. And well, the part, it's like you're playing it a little like darker, and it just needs to be like brighter, like a happier, whatever, a little more just yellow, like, okay. Yeah, I can make that like a little more yellow. But like really like, okay, I heard what that means. And so, okay, they want it more, happier sounding. You're going to put the third, like you're going to voice things with thirds on top. You know, you're going to add those colors that, you know, chordally and voice leading. And like, there's ways to play things purple or play things yellow and whatever. And so you get good at, you know, translating that.
Right. Which is another one of those things. It's a big part of the job that's beyond just the playing itself, like the ability to play your instrument. So you mentioned the hang. We know translating. What are some of the things that you learned in the room with the other people that you're collaborating with that is an important part of your job as a session player?
A lot of the time sessions are a race to the obvious. We just played a take, and it's quite clearly 3 beats too fast, and it's maybe a half step too high for the singer. And yeah, we shouldn't have, you know, that little thing where we broke down that little gag before the second chorus, that totally ruined all the momentum and whatever. That's top of mind when you're playing, and so the first take ends and everybody itches to get on the talk back and go, hey, was it a little too fast? You know, was it a little high? And like, you know, just knowing when to just kind of, you know, when it's your time to speak and when it's not, basically, and reading the room that way. That's one of the main things that I see a lot of people try and, you know, do too much, basically.
So is there a point where you started to have another realization between like playing on demos, playing on records, then what's like the next stage of your, you know, of your career? What was sort of the next thing that happened after you get called in to get more records, a few more start popping up, you start becoming the kind of first call guy for a lot of big producers in town, and then what is the next thought process that started to come your way?
And I kind of started to catch myself on certain sessions. I would catch myself being the guy I said I wouldn't be. In Nashville, being a session player, if you're paying the bills playing your instrument, the answer is to say yes to whatever pays the bills. It's not all Keith Urban records and Carrie Underwood records. Like, there's a lot of records that with union scale pay the exact same, but are less quality. And so I started to be the guy that I said I wouldn't be, is like on those sessions, you know, I would just kind of catch myself doing a passive B3 and doing a passive piano and just kind of like getting up and walking to the lounge and being on my phone, and somebody, hey, could you maybe do a pulse thing on the synth, you know, and I'm not really hearing it. I don't think it needed it, but okay. You know, like that is the opposite headspace that you should be in to be a thriving, successful session player. And I was in a place of privilege at that moment that I was getting the calls and I was simultaneously acting like that, which is where it's not congruent. And if you do that a lot and for too long, like, you become that guy and then people stop calling you and you don't want to be that guy. I'm 31 and 32 and already the guy that's sort of checked out a little bit. You know, that makes me sad. that kind of scares me a little bit. And I was having these conversations. I was self-aware, going, I got to just figure out what it is. I was working a lot with Joey Moy, who's a producer, and he's sort of a bit of a mentor guy that I sort of looked up to. And I was spending a lot of time with him doing like overdubs. He's a very detail-oriented producer, from the, you know, sort of Mutt Lange school of minutia and details and that kind of thing. So we just spent a lot of time together, and I started going like, you know, like I got to figure out what's next and there's a linear timeline of the life cycle of a song that begins with writers in a writer room and just an acoustic guitar, and that ends with a number one song on the radio and a band playing it live on David Letterman. You know, it's like, okay, well, I've jumped on the song right after the very beginning in the demo stage. I've seen how you turn a work tape into a demo. I've seen how you turn a demo into, a record on the session floor. And then I've seen how you turn a song that's mixed and recorded and it's on the radio and how you play that live. There's the black hole of like, okay, you've recorded it and then it's on the radio and it's a number one. Like, what happens in between then? And so basically, Joey was real generous. Like, it was kind of producer school for me. And I started comping drums and comping bass and guitar, and this is how you do this, and this is how he likes to, and he sort of taught me how he likes to hear things. And over time, like, that turned into a co-production situation, sort of scratched that existential itch of like, what's next? It's like, okay, well, there's something else. There's a whole new world of things to learn.
Was that a situation that you sought out, or was that something that just sort of happened around the time that you were starting to recognize that you needed this shift?
It was me asking Joey, like, hey, if I want to learn about production, do I, me talking to a successful producer, like, do I have to go down to Lower Broadway and find a singer that is yet undiscovered and find songs, and like, just, do I have to start from scratch? Like, just asking, and he's, no, you don't have to. Come check this out. So it was, it grew organically. It was just sort of like curiosity that turned into like an opportunity. And then it turned into, it was like, okay, well, now in order to do this, I'm going to have to say no to some sessions and make time. What that meant was I found a way to basically say no to the session things that weren't bringing me joy and where I wasn't sort of my best self. And I was able to fill that time with stuff that was making me happy, which was the production stuff. And
I think that is such a great example of perspective and self-awareness, and something that applies regardless of where you're at in your career.
Totally.
And it's so important because we can just so easily get pulled away from the joy that comes out of creating music when we're focused on making a living from it and solely from wherever that will come from, And there's a point in our careers where we have to say yes to everything. We gotta go after it. That's where you learn, that's where you grow, that's where you build your network. And then there's times where you have to start to discover what are the things that are really fulfilling me and how can I still make a living and still like make this stuff continue to happen, but then also make sure that I make time for the things that are keeping it alive. And I think that's how you have a long-lasting career.
For sure. And the thing that's going to be the surefire killer to all of it is that if you're the guy that is a grumpy, grouchy, distracted, the entitled, the ego, if you embody those attributes, what was clear to me from my like case study of every musician I ever met from being a young kid in bars to today, I'm always trying to figure out like, okay, well, that guy's 65 and like, he's good. Like he did it right. That guy, I want to like, he's 70. Like how did you get there? Like, what is it that guy and that guy and that guy did where I can point out as many or more guys that I'm going like, man, if I'm in that place when I'm 65, when I'm 70, like, man, that's going to bum me out. So to like, in my case study in my head of, what makes the successful music human being, at the end of the game, a lot of it is your disposition and your headspace and your just the way you carry yourself and your positivity and the vibe that you bring to the room you're in. And that is more important than all of it. And so it's kind of like, if you are not able to bring that, then it's all for nothing. Like, and that will eventually cut your legs out from under you at some point. Like, nobody wants to work with you if you're not good to be around, if you're not happy.
Right. So you have to find the environment that will allow you to do all of those things in the positive direction.
Sure. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So as that decision happened, where you started learning about the production more, getting into that world, but then most recently you've been diving in more to songwriting.
Yeah.
So where did that kind of stem from?
So that was like, I mean, production started being the main thing up there with sessioning, and I was working quite a bit with Joey. And just at that moment in my life, I got married, and my work-life balance, this was the first time, 32 or 33, it's the first time in my life that I sort of had to take a zoom out look at, like, beyond working, like beyond being a musician and chasing the music career.
Because it becomes our life.
It's
all you focus on.
It is
until that you find someone that maybe can take a fraction.
Workaholic for sure. Like and in the States, like culturally, it's celebrated. Like the grind is celebrated. Like working 7 days a week, 14-hour days for years. Whatever. Like whatever version of that. Is to you.
That makes you Superman, right?
That makes you awesome, and that makes you successful, and like that is the end goal. And so it's like, once you're the dog that sort of catches that, and you're going like, oh fuck, like I have 30 more years of this, like what, like it just makes you kind of like, okay, well, what's next, big picture wise. And so organically, a friend of mine, and the same friend that brought me into that first session, Stephen Lee Olson, was sort of my songwriting cheerleader. Just as he was like, yeah, you're a session player, you come and play on my session, like, because you're a session player, you're a songwriter, so like, let's write some songs. I'm like, I don't know, okay, and that grew into finding a publishing deal and signing a pub deal, and I have a couple of cuts. I have a song, my first song going to radio as a songwriter, and I'm juggling that with being a session player still. And one of the first songs that I wrote with Stephen Lee Olson, he brought me into a write with, it was a Zoom write at the beginning of COVID with Charles Kelly and Chris Galbuta, who's another brilliant writer. And we wrote a song, I built the track, and that ended up being a really cool song and a really cool track. And everybody respective publisher kind of reached out to me going like, did you make that track? Like, are you a writer? What are you? I'm like, I don't know. I'm not a writer. I'm new. I guess, yeah, I'm a writer. Yeah, I'm a writer. Yeah, I'm a writer. Yeah, book me, like sign me up with all of your other writers. Make me, that co-writing. like, okay, I can do that. The same way I said, yeah, I'm a session player. I don't know. Yes, I'm a session player. Again, with this whole Toolbelt, tool palette.
New word alert.
New word, here we go. But a tool belt, and it's an amalgamation where I sit right now, like everything that I have learned to this day is equally important, from jazz music school to country music road playing stuff to bleep bloop session synth pulses to whatever, comping drums and learning how to get a good vocal, performance, and how to stand behind the glass and get a good performance out of a band, and what sort of drum fills work and whatever, like all of those things, then you sort of call yourself a songwriter, and you're able to basically put all of those experiences into the songs. And so now I'm basically like, I'm not producing a lot for hire, but I'm producing my own demos, and I write, if I'm not doing sessions, I'm writing 4 or 5 days a week, and that means I'm producing 4 or 5 songs, finished, mixed demos. And that, in the last year and a half, like I have 150, so I've done that 150 times, and if each one took me as long as the first one, which was that Charles Kelly one, like I would be dead right now, because like I lost 5 years of my life trying to, the first time I'm YouTubing how to get drum sounds, like how to mix, how to whatever, like how to reamp guitar. Like I didn't know how to do a lot of that stuff. And so learning on the fly. And so now fast forward a couple years later, I can knock out a demo really quickly and make it cool and make it loud and do the things that demos need to do. And I can do that day of and have something out the next morning and then move on and be able to, so it's like spinning, you're just trying to spin plates and keep balls juggling and all the other, those analogies.
Something that a lot of people have a hard time doing in our industry is just allowing themselves to say, I am this.
Yeah.
And they feel like they need to be validated by something else in order to be there. And I don't mean saying I am this in an egotistical way or even acting like you've already made it before you have. I'm saying that for someone to define themselves as what they intend to be is a very powerful and courageous thing to do before you've necessarily been validated by that in the greater part of the industry.
Totally.
And you've clearly done that throughout your career in very exceptional ways.
Thank you. Keep in mind though, even at this place in time, to a lot of people, I am a session player, and to a lot of people, I am a songwriter. And a lot of people, I'm an accordion player, and I'm like, they don't know I play the piano. They know me as an accordion player because that's how somebody introduced me to them. And at that point, at some point that bummed me out when somebody would introduce me and go, this is on the golf course. This is Dave. He's a killer accordion player. He's a killer keyboard player. And I go like, well, I'm a producer too. Like I'm, I'm not just an accordion player. Like, I mean, yeah, I do that, but I play the piano. Like, and that sort of bummed me out, going like, my perception is not what I want it to be with that guy. Like I want him, as soon as I'm saying I'm a session player, like it's like you want to simultaneously broadcast that to all the people that were, all the new people you meet, and then to everybody who you already know that know you as this other thing. Like, keep that going. Like, you don't have to tell all those people to go fuck off because you're this now. But I keep making that point because a lot of time I sort of, when I go for a coffee with a new so-and-so in town, like it's people wanting to make the transition from road to at-home stuff and whatever. It's like, well, I'm, like I don't really have a plan moving forward. I just have this blind faith in that I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to simultaneously like kind of burn all these bridges and move forward, and I'm declaring myself a session player, and like that is not how it goes. Like there's more nuance to that,
right?
And I think a lot of people go, they miss the nuance and they sort of shoot themselves in the foot by going like, I'm quitting this. But it's more like I'm making time for this.
Yeah, and adding to your tool palette.
Totally. Yes. Classic.
That is awesome. And the great thing that you've continued to bring up throughout our conversation is saying what's next, which always. I think is just amazing, an essential way to look at things. Being very grateful for every opportunity that comes your way, learning from it, taking that knowledge, and then thinking about, okay, this is awesome. But what is the next thing?
Yeah.
And it seems to be that is just an incredible formula for being able to have a career that will last your lifetime and that will allow you to enjoy that career your entire life.
God, I hope so. Like at the very, very beginning, I just wanted to make any kind of living playing the piano, keyboards in any way. And then it was like, okay, all I want to do is get on a bus. I don't care what bus. I don't care where it's going. I want to get on a bus. And then it was all about getting off the bus. Like, I don't care what I do. Just if I can just get off the bus and get in town, I don't care. I'll play this. I'll do anything. And so it's just that, it's just like organically moving forward with stuff.
Thank you for sharing your story with me. I hope this is helpful for the people that are looking for these answers, in their career. And hopefully we'll be able to keep chatting and share some more great information with everybody in the future.
Yeah. Absolutely, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, man.
This is so cool.